Professor Sir Jim McDonald has told me I shall probably take far too long, so I shan't. I'm just very excited that we are staging what I have termed the Great Debate, because it lies at it's the great issue for so many of us, with a big, big question mark over it, of course. And I can think of no better people to be here to show us both sides of the coin, and a superb chairman, who I'm going to hand over to before he complains that I am going on for too long. Professor Sir Jim McDonald needs no introduction, so he's not going to get one. But Jim, it's over to you to really keep our guys under control and to tee up as many questions as you can from the floor, because we do want your participation, please. Over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the all-energy Great Debate that has been exciting quite a lot of interest, and I'm glad to see such a good turnout. As Judith said, we have around 45 minutes today. I'll make some introductions in a moment. So our guests, our speakers will be speaking for about 10 minutes each, giving you their perspectives on the key issues around the great energy debate, and then we'll be going to Q&A. So I'll be certainly chairing from the stage up here on behalf of the conference, our two guests. I'll also suggest when it comes to Q&A, I do not want speeches. I'm looking for Q&A so that our two speakers can get a chance to respond. So clearly a point will have to be made, and you can elaborate the question, but please don't be using any soapboxes from under the chairs. We don't have the time for that today. The all-energy debate is delighted to welcome Mr. Fergus Ewing. Fergus also is well known to everyone in the hall. He's Minister in the Scottish Government for Energy, Enterprise and Tourism, and will be opening the event this afternoon. You'll have seen from the programme that originally Tom Greatrix was expected to join us. Unfortunately, Tom had a family bereavement and cannot join us today, but we're genuinely delighted and very grateful that Frank Doran, who is the MP for Aberdeen North and well known to people in this part of the world for stepping in at the last minute, and again qualified to contribute as Frank in previous roles in government where he acted as Shadow Energy Minister. You will have, many of you, done some reading over the past few months, the Scottish Government's White Paper on Scotland's future, particularly the section on energy that I'm sure Fergus will be referring to, and more recently DEC's publication on the Scotland Analysis series, Scotland Analysis on Energy itself, prefaced by Ed Davey, covering a number of the issues I'm sure that will come up in discussion. And there will be several issues that Fergus and Frank will touch on. There are issues around single market continuation and current trading arrangements, the commitment to renewable energy and the targets that we have set currently and where they might go depending on what happens in September, the need to rewire Scotland, the investment in our grid around transmission systems. What does this mean for consumers? Because we are still trying to inform the debate, and the corporates and those of us that understand some of the technical issues are certainly connected to this alongside policy and economy. But at the end of the day, it's consumers that pay the bills, pay for the infrastructure and the subsidies. So there has to be a view there taken. And of course, you'll have seen from the Scottish White Paper about the proposition of an energy fund, which I'm sure will be referred to. So colleagues, we will start the ball rolling now, and please join me in welcoming Fergus Ewing to the podium for his 10-minute input. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to propose that independence is good for Scotland and good for the rest of the UK, because all my life I've campaigned for an independent Scotland, and I've done so not because in the SNP I or any of my colleagues have any quarrel, any dislike, any argument with the English people, but because we think that Scotland should, like most countries in the world, have the status of independence, which allows us to govern our own affairs. Independence is the normal status for countries in the world. Very few countries who gain independence ever go back. And it is the normal status for independence because of a very simple truth. And that truth is that no one can manage their affairs better in a country than the people who live and work in that country, wherever they come from, whether they're native to that country or not, or new Scots, it doesn't matter. No one can run their own affairs more effectively than a country people themselves. And that is true because no one cares more than the people who live in Scotland and who work in Scotland that we get it right. And of course, with independence, it means that we will have the government that we vote for, not a government that is chosen by others, as has often been the case. And there's another facet. Sometimes in Scotland, we complain an awful lot, do we not? And we're looking for somebody to blame. And sometimes, perhaps, we tend to blame others down south for our problems. With independence, we will be responsible for our own affairs. Nobody to blame but ourselves. So independence brings responsibility with it. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to make that general point to start off with, and also assure you that in the SNP, we believe that following a yes vote on the 18th of September, there will be the most mature, sensible, adult negotiations and discussions between the First Minister, Alex Salmond, and David Cameron, which, over a period of 18 months, will lead to independence being declared in spring 2016. I'm quite happy that Alex Salmond will be leading the negotiation team. I think a lot of people think that we've got a strong leader and someone who not only cares deeply about Scotland, but is also pretty smart. And of course, I want to address perhaps one of the most important areas of those discussions, which relates to energy, both in terms of the generation of electricity and also oil and gas and other important matters. And our fundamental proposition is that we believe that post-independence there could, there should, there must, and there will be a strategic partnership which will continue the operation of the electricity grid as a UK entity. Indeed, any other possibility is fanciful in the extreme. We have commissioned an expert report led by Robert Armour with a series of experts, some of whom I think are in this room, independent of the Scottish Government, to advise us about some of the technical aspects of management of such a system, and we expect to receive their report fairly shortly. However, I can put it to you with a fairly simple metaphor, and this is a metaphor born of my experience of enjoying and seeking to foster as good relations I can, as you may have heard me say before, with Ed Davey, the Cabinet Secretary for Energy in the UK government, and with Greg Barker, and with Michael Fallon, and with Charles Henry before them, and so on and so forth. We have good relations. It is correct that I do that, and don't pick fights, and don't play politics with it. I've tried to eschew that wherever we possibly can. But we're not at the moment involved, ladies and gentlemen, in the key decisions that are important to pursue energy policy in Scotland, and especially renewables. The decision to close ROCs was made. It wasn't one we felt that was taken in the right way. The decision to proceed with FID in EMR was not one about which we were fully consulted, nor the rules governing FID in EMR. That is unfortunate because we think we have got a considerable amount of knowledge and expertise within the Scottish Government and the wider public sector and industry contacts to offer. So at the moment, the metaphor is this. If energy policy is being driven with Ed Davey, the driver in the car, at the moment, we're either in the back seat, if we're lucky, or we're in the boot of the car. With independence, we can be co-drivers. We will have a partnership with the UK, and we will have a much stronger say. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will lead, I think, to a much stronger influence on pursuing objectives, which I know many of you share in renewable energy. Now, of course, it will be said that the current system, and it has been said, the current system subsidises Scotland. It does not subsidise Scotland. It subsidises projects. You are delivering many of these projects. And those projects are necessary to keep the lights on they generate electricity. And every one of those projects involves companies that include Scottish companies, but also many, many in England. So every single one of these projects which receives substantial funding is a multinational project. So it is not Scotland that receives the subsidies, but the projects, and they are necessary to secure electricity supply. In any event, there has been no reference of the cost to the taxpayer, whichever side of the border he or she may be on, about the nuclear Hinkley Point project, which Peter Atherton of Liberum Capital described as the most expensive nuclear power station anywhere in the world, £5 million per megawatt, as opposed to 700,000 per megawatt for gas power stations. Now, whether or not that project passes the EU Commission state aid rules is for the EU Commission to determine. But the point I'm making is that with a subsidy of £45,000 million, compare that with the levy control framework, which is £8 billion, then we can see that Scotland would, if we are in a partnership, be making a contribution to projects that are located down south. So there's two sides to the subsidy equation, and I don't think the argument stacks up because electricity doesn't realise when it crosses a border. Also, as well as this, the Ofgem, the regulator, has highlighted last June that the capacity margin in the UK is now alarmingly slim, between 2 and 5% surplus of aggregate capacity over peak demand. That is not good. In fact, I would go as far to say that does represent a failure of energy policy in the UK. And sadly, Ofgem, who are expected to update their figures in June next month, given the closure of coal-generating capacity since last June, I can only see that that is getting worse. So, at a time when capacity may be zero, the surplus may be down to zero at a cold winter's night, then it is sensible that all possible sources of electricity are available for the UK consumer to avoid brownouts or even blackouts. So Scotland's electricity generation is required to maintain electricity supply. Last year and the year before, we exported 26% of our electricity, total electricity generated, to the south, and we're happy to continue to do so. And moreover, if there is this parlous margin down to 2% or less, what happens to the market? Well, the laws of supply and demand are that when demand matches supply, the prices go up, and they may go up very, very high. And nor can the UK obtain electricity from elsewhere. Ed Davey did say we might get some from Iceland, but since there's no interconnector to Iceland, that does seem difficult in engineering terms. So we want to work together, ladies and gentlemen, in partnership. And we in the Scottish Government will honour all our obligations. Those of you who are developers, those of you who are financiers, those of you who are involved in projects in various ways need to know that you have certainty that this will continue. Therefore, we honour the ROCs, the FIT tariffs, and we honour the CFD commitments going forward in partnership with the UK. Of course, these things will involve negotiation, but so does everything else complex in life. The key is whether there is goodwill, and as far as we are concerned, there is goodwill. And after the yes vote on the 18th of September, I fully expect that that goodwill will be evident in statements which I imagine the First Minister and the Prime Minister will say following a yes vote. I wanted just to say briefly about oil and gas. We are in one of the richest cities in the world and one of the most successful countries in the world. I'm just back from the OTC for the third year in Houston, 110,000 delegates. And what I discovered there, again, was a tremendous goodwill towards Scotland. I met 5 chief executives of 5 of the major oil and gas companies in the world. They're all investing in Scotland, and they're all going to do more in Scotland, either immediately or probably within the next 12 months. Nobody, none of them, not a word about concern about independence. They're concerned about the Ukraine. They're interested in shale gas, yes. Not in the slightest bit bothered about independence. Not a factor, not on their radar. Why? Because they invest in Scotland. Because in areas such as subsea, we are quite simply the best in the world. And we now make apart from the North Sea itself, Scottish companies now make an aggregate value per annum of revenue, not from the North Sea, but from international work of £10,000 million. And the more we are expert in EOR, in seismic, in all the new technologies, the more our academics and our companies, our SMEs succeed in that, the more value will be generated in international work throughout the world in these disciplines, and that is what is happening that's been what's happening over the past decade. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm getting the eye from Sir Jim here, so I better bring my remarks to a close. I'm happy to answer any of your questions later, but I do believe that independence for Scotland will allow us to achieve our real potential in renewables and do a number more things more quickly than we can do at the moment, where, as you might say, we have so many resources but a lack of political influence and power. Quite simply, we have in Scotland all of the fuel but none of the power. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Fergus. And ladies and gentlemen, now in response, please join me in welcoming Frank Doran to the podium to give his 10-minute input. Thank you very much indeed.
I've got to say I'm a bit disappointed on Fergus's speech. It was very policy light, but so is the white paper, particularly its energy section. What I want to do is try and fill in a number of issues which I think need to be considered in much more detail than appears to have been considered by the SNP government in the way in which they've approached the whole energy issue. And I'll start with renewables and job investment. They're obviously a key part of the SNP energy strategy. And they claim that investment has been put at risk by UK government's mismanagement of electricity market reform. My response to that is that if you look at the balance sheet, a lot of the money, a substantial proportion of the money which is coming out of government coffers to the renewable industries is coming to Scotland. In 2012-2013, Scotland redeemed 12.6 million ROCs with a total value of 562 million. That's 28% of ROC payments for the whole of the UK, given to or delivered to 8.3% of the population. In addition, Scotland is likely to receive significant proportions, way beyond the proportion of the population in relation to feed-in tariffs. At the same time, the future is going to be bright and rosy, and we're going to be I think the energy, the Saudi, the green Saudi of the Western world. But offshore power capacity has stalled in Scotland at around about 190 megawatts. There's been no change since the second quarter of 2010. Meanwhile, in the rest of the UK, there's growth of 37% from 1648 megawatts to 3,467 in the last 2 years. In the first half of 2013-14, 31 million pounds of constraint payments were incurred within Scotland, totalling 67% of all UK constraint payments. We're not getting a raw deal. 67% of all constraint payments suggests, and we know this, that the major problem opening up constraint payments is the transmission system between Scotland and England. Fergus mentioned nuclear, and of course, the SNP have pledged to make Scotland a nuclear-free country, which would mean closing the two existing stations, Torness and Hunterston, which supply 33% of the country's energy. I'm not totally opposed. I'm not a great supporter of the nuclear industry, but we have to recognise that without nuclear generation, there's no base load of low-carbon power in Scotland without nuclear. And the SNP plans to close nuclear also puts at risk and could undermine our export potential. Nuclear power creates the margin which allows Scotland to function as a net exporter of energy. On North Sea oil, again, which Fergus mentioned, I think that these are completely at variance with the reality in this area. The SNP position is there are 24 billion barrels of oil equivalent remaining. That figure's been thrown about all over the place, and that creates a wholesale value of 1.5 trillion. An independent Scottish government offers greater fiscal stability, say the North Sea oil. As somebody who opposed the last tax cut and the Labour Party's first proposed tax cut in 1997, which was finally withdrawn, I can understand that. I accept that criticism. But when we look at the base figures on which the energy policy is being developed, that 1.5 trillion, it begins to melt very easily. That figure is based on an estimate of how much oil equivalent remains in the North Sea fields at a price of $100. They lump all hydrocarbons together and suggest that gas reserves would also be sold at $100 a barrel, despite this being way above the market price for gas, and a dollar to sterling exchange rate that's now 18 months old. Decommissioning of installations in the North Sea is going to be extraordinarily expensive. It's underway now. The UK government has set aside a fund which is going to stretch till 2040. Costs of the decommission are likely to be around about 31.5 billion, and the UK government set up a 20 billion fund. Alex Salmond says he's going to match that, but he hasn't explained where the money is going to come from and what impact that would have on the Scottish economy. And we've got to remember as well that in the last 2 years, production in the oil and gas industry has fallen by 30%. There's a huge boom in the industry at the moment. The last 2 years have seen massive investments, record levels of investment. But that is still in the light of these reducing production figures. We haven't got a lot of time, so just looking at one or two other areas. There's the issue about interconnectors and transmission charges. That's been a major issue, a long-standing issue, one of the main grievances that the SNP have had. They claim that Scottish generators produce 12% of UK generation, but account for 40% of the transmission costs, or about 100 million per year more than their fair share. Well, if you look at the facts, in 2012, Scotland exported 11,000 gigawatts to England. That's just 4% of England's demand. This is already less than the 5% that England received from European countries, mainly France and Holland. The Scottish-English interconnection capacity is 20% less than the European capacity, which is set to double by the end of the decade. So in England, to keep their energy requirements up to scratch, they're building now for the future to import more energy from the continent. One single power station, Fergus mentioned Hinkley Point C, will outmatch Scotland in its contribution to the English grid. It's projected to meet about 7% of UK demand. Remember, Scotland's providing 4% at the moment. Investment in network transmission is already being made as part of a coordinated programme through the UK regulatory framework, and Scotland will benefit from up to 6 billion of investment in the electricity transmission network, and that's almost 30% of the investment earmarked for British upgrades. We're not losing out on that front either. And on the issue of constraint costs, last year total constraint costs stood at 161 million, of which 77 million pounds related to the England-Scotland boundary, and a further 31 million were incurred within Scotland. Scotland got 67%, as I said earlier, of all constraint payments, and this raises a question around whether constraint costs would still be incurred if we had a different constitutional arrangements. At present, even though the cost of covering charges is spread evenly between generators and suppliers across the whole GB, the cost is largely associated with transmitting Scottish-generated electricity. There are issues about capacity margins in the UK. Fergus mentioned that. Ofgem do confirm that there is a shrinking margin in the UK, but point out that this is coming down from a historic high. A quote from Ofgem, a recent Ofgem report, we expect that electricity derated capacity margins will decrease significantly from the current historically high levels. Coming down from an oversupply of around 20% to 10% will bring the rest of the UK into line with European standards, which tend to be much lower. There is a problem in England and in Scotland about ageing facilities, but these are being addressed as well. At present, England does import about 11,000 gigawatts from Scotland, compared to its total consumption of 268,000 gigawatts. So that's 4% of England's electricity being provided by Scotland. In the event of separation, this shortfall could easily be recouped either from new construction or from interconnectors to Europe. The reality is, at the end of the day, it will be a commercial decision. It's not one that will be easily negotiated. That's...
Move to closing remarks, please. That would be great.
Okay, I'll wind up very quickly. Just very quickly on the single market. Fergus made it again this morning. We will be part of a single market. Despite the and assumptions about a single market agreement, there has been no discussion, no consideration. Westminster has not been consulted. And there is no precedent for two countries operating under a single transmission operator. Ireland and Northern Ireland have a separate arrangement. Anywhere in the world, this does not happen. It's very unlikely to happen in the case of Scotland and England. As I say, commercial considerations will apply, and they may not necessarily favour Scotland.
Okay, Fergus, Frank, thank you very much indeed. I know Fergus will be patient with me because he wants to respond to a number of those points, but we'll leave that to the closing comments as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's start with Q&A. Again, let me encourage you, in order to be fair to everyone in the hall, I want to have 15 minutes of Q&A to get as many people involved as possible. So I will not be patient with speeches, but I will take questions so that our speakers can respond to it. So there's I believe there are roving microphones. There are, indeed. So if you introduce yourself, your name and affiliation, and a sharp question, please.
Hello, Theo Horton, Wind Farm Analytics. Isn't it true that government intervention needs to be clear and unambiguous? Considering the call for 2030 renewables target, specifically renewables target from countries in Europe, what would your opinion be on that? Should we have either in Scotland or the UK a specific 2030 renewables target and across Europe? And also, will you support intervention for energy storage? Do you have anything positive to say on possibility of energy storage for either hydrogen or pumped hydro, because earlier it was mentioned the need for backup for renewables, but surely we can have renewable backup for renewables. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Ewing?
Yes, thank you. We do think that there should be 2030 targets, preferably on a European basis. We fought for a 2030 decarbonisation target in the EMR process. The UK government did not agree. The reason that we felt it was correct was we felt that it would give a very clear signal to industry that there would be targets that could be aimed for the offshore wind sector in particular, and that the lack of that would make it more difficult to establish a Scotland and a UK industry in offshore wind. And we're now seeing a kind of rationing of offshore wind projects, and the risk about that is that other than the project which is going ahead in Hull, and we support that from Siemens, there is not as much manufacturing activity attracted to the UK as a 2030 target, we believe, would have facilitated. Those of you who saw Johan's presentation from DNV will see what the future could hold for offshore wind, combined with storage in very exciting ways. To get there, we need to be bold and give support to the industry. I think we have given that in Scotland, and we, therefore, with independence, would be far better placed to influence within the EU and the UK the setting of targets in that way, which would be beneficial for the industry without a shadow of a doubt. Secondly, with regard to energy storage, yes, I have consented the Corrie Glass pump storage scheme. Scottish Power have a very ambitious scheme at Cruachan. Of course, we already have storage schemes in Scotland and a history of that. There needs to be more use of storage as the perfect antidote to the intermittency of wind. That is something which should be part of the mix without a shadow of a doubt. And lastly, I mean, of course, at the moment, offshore wind is expensive, but the aim is to engineer the cost down. And I put it to you this, in the long term, setting aside the constitutional argument, the UK is expected to import 70% of its gas supplies, 70% by 2020. That means the UK is beholden to those who supply the gas, whether from Russia, from Ukraine. Is that a sensible position to be in? I think not. And therefore, we have to support our indigenous renewable sector. If we are independent, we will argue this, like, if you like, a non-executive director in the UK board. And I believe that we will have some sway, because I think there's a very strong power of weight of argument behind both the target and the need for pump storage.
Okay. Mr. Doran?
I think that the biggest problem that the whole industry faces, the whole energy industry faces particularly, is that the imperative that appeared to be there to reduce emission targets and have cleaner energy in the run-up to Copenhagen took a different form from where it is now. I think after Copenhagen, there was a sense that, well, that didn't work. And the economy. Then we went into the downturn and the huge impact on the banking crisis on the economy, and the emission reduction has taken a back seat. And that's not in any one country, it's across the board. It has become less important, and it doesn't have the profile that it had. At the same time, I think that we've seen huge efforts made, particularly in this country and in other countries, and the renewable industry is a key part of that. And I think at the end of the day, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, what new artifacts will be discovered, what new science or technology is going to be able to do for us. But everything that we have at the moment needs to be done, needs to be improved, and needs to be supported. And I don't think any government would shy away from that, despite what I said originally about the sort of lower political interest in the issue. There's still a recognition that we need to do something. But I think it's likely that a number of targets will be missed, and that will be a serious problem for all of us.
Okay. We'll take other questions, and I'm going to encourage Fergus and Frank to give us just as sharp a response as we are going to get sharpness in questions, so just to maximise the time. There are other hands up here, please.
Professor Peter Strachan, Aberdeen Business School. Successive Westminster governments have failed to control the rise in electricity and gas prices. When it comes to energy in Westminster, I'm not feeling in particularly safe hands. Convince me otherwise.
Frank?
I'm not sure I heard all of that, but you're absolutely right. There is a dilemma. I can remember feeling really annoyed when we came into government in '97, and Gordon Brown effectively imposed the green taxes and the VAT payments that were made on energy, and we discussed the dilemma at the time. And it is very difficult. The present government has found by removing the green obligations on companies that suits their strategy for austerity. It does nothing for the improvement of emission-free energy. And I think that is a tragedy.
Fergus, if you don't mind.
Well, we've proposed that the cost of the warm homes discount and the energy company obligation be removed from the energy bills, resulting in an annual saving of around £70. But we do think that the issue of price is really a factor of bigger issues about supply and demand. And the problem is supply and demand are now more or less aligned, which is going to push prices up. Also, we have done things to control household bills for certain people in various other areas, and we have a record of improving the energy efficiency through insulation and other methods of 600,000 homes since 2008. That's 100,000 homes a year. That's not bad, and we're putting more money into that energy efficiency side of things. But in the wider scheme of things, in which perhaps this audience will be more interested, we need to have a proper energy policy. I don't really think that there is in the UK, and I don't make this as a political point, a particularly coherent energy policy. And sadly, many of the components of it, which were expected to be delivered, are being delayed and deferred because of the complexity and the difficulty of the EMR system. Now, we are where we are. We've got to move forward with the facts as they are, not back. But I think that a positive partner in Scotland playing a role of the sort that I think you've described earlier in the speech in the main conference event would be a force for good, because it would very much press the case for the development of renewables in particular. And we are world leaders in renewables. We've seen the UK being world leaders in things before, and then it hasn't been given enough support. And then other countries, enterprising countries, Japan, Germany, Norway, Finland, China, India, they come along and they do things better. And suddenly we lose our preeminence in tidal or whatever. So let's be bold. And I think an independent Scotland can play a very positive part in bringing a coherent energy policy to these islands. And that's indeed what we want to do. And that's in the interests of supply and costs and companies.
Okay. Next questions, please. Let me see. Here's one at the front here. And I'll come to the gentleman at the back shortly.
Thank you. James Whitworth. I'm retired and I live in Shetland. And the big hole in the whole debate, the elephant in the room, is the fact there's not one independence referendum, there's 4 independence referendums in September. One for Scotland on the 18th, and then the 3 island groups, the Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland, get their own votes on the 25th. If Shetland, where I live, were to go independent and take the oil and gas with it, as is suggested by the article in the European Journal of International Law published in 2002, then the finances of the Scottish independence idea go haywire, and the energy resources in terms of gas and oil get split much further. What are the comments on this, which has not been discussed at all in any debate I've heard?
Okay, thank you, sir. And
Can I answer very quickly? Sorry.
Right.
Good luck.
Frank, I'm going to take that as your contribution at that point. Fergus, I know that there would be much to be discussed, but if you could just maybe a summary response, and I'm sure you and the gentleman will have a chance to talk after this session.
Well, I haven't read the article in 2002, but I have visited Shetland in 2011, 12, 13, and 14, and I don't really detect any desire for independence in Shetland, and I say that having done public meetings in Shetland, where I would have expected the point to be put. But what we do have is forged a great relationship with Shetland. It's something that's really important to us. And whether it's in decommissioning, the ideal place to do decommissioning is Shetland, because it's nearest the fields. So Murdo McKeever, Sandra Lawrenson and Shetland are best placed to do that, and we are working with them. And I'm working with Gary Robinson and the Council and many of his colleagues. We have an excellent relationship, and we want to give a greater sense of decision-making to the islands as well in an independent Scotland. So it is a scenario, but I don't think it will become the actual scenario.
Okay, Fergus, thank you. There was a question at the back of the hall.
My name is Ian Arden. I'm representing the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, and I was the lead author of the recent reports we did on Scottish energy policy and energy storage. I was interested that this was billed as an energy debate, but it's really been about electricity. Since in both of those reports we pointed out that Scottish energy demand electricity represents only about 20% of Scottish energy demand. That's rather strange. Every debate I go to revolves around electricity. 50 to 55% is heating requirement. Most of that is served by natural gas, and as I understand it, there is very little natural gas in Scotland, nor other pipelines, direct or LNG terminals in Scotland. How is that going to be met in future?
Thanks, Ian. Fergus, would you take that, and then we'll follow with Frank?
Well, I think the Institute does play a very valuable part, and we have recently debated this in the Scottish Parliament. It didn't get a great deal of coverage, but I commend that debate to you. We recognise that we need to do more on the district heating front, and Aberdeen is central to that, as I mentioned earlier. We need to deal with various parts of Scotland that are dependent on particular forms of liquid gas, which may or not be around. There are a number of practical problems that we are dealing with. You're right, they don't hit the newspapers, but this is an area of policy that does require more airtime. We've set up the Heat Network Partnership to coordinate support for district heating programs to go forward. And I do work with and meet regularly with many of the key stakeholders to discuss the practical aspects which the Institute raises. So these are issues which are challenging for the whole of the UK, and Scotland wants to work on the partnership basis to tackle them effectively together, working with the Institute and other experts.
Frank?
I can't add very much to that. I think the governments both in Scotland and England are doing a good job, but not enough, and it's a question of allocation of resources. And I think that the energy sourcing is going to be a major issue for government, and the cost of that energy will figure very heavily in the next general election, and it will till I think we've all left this planet.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we are time constrained, so I'm going to take one final question before we ask for summing up. There's a lady just off the central aisle, just here.
Thank you. My name is Louise Wilson from Abundance. We crowdfund renewable energy projects. I just wanted to ask both sides what consideration has been given to the growing recognition that we are potentially in a carbon bubble, and that the price of hydrocarbons and the value of hydrocarbons is potentially massively overrated.
I'm not going to choose one. Who wants to go the first over the top on that one?
I mean, I'm aware of the general arguments. I have to say I haven't studied them particularly closely, and I'm not really sure that perhaps I'm best to opine on that. But of course, there is an interest, as I think Frank's comments earlier arises from this, because we've seen the fluctuation of the oil price as low as $10 a barrel a couple of decades ago to now round about stable at $100 a barrel. I mean, plainly, the body of opinion in future in the industry seems to be that the price is likely to remain about that level for decades to come, based on an analysis of estimated supply and demand. But of course, we are in the hands of international markets here, and we all have to deal with that and factor that into our decision making, which we do.
Frank?
I think I've been involved in looking at or involved with the oil industry for about 40 years now, and the very first thing I learned is all projections of available oil or recovery of oil and cost of oil are wrong, inevitably. I think that the issue in this debate on oil prices and everything that involves is really about whether it is appropriate for any country to depend on one commodity for its fiscal stability, and particularly one that is as volatile as the oil price. Fergus mentioned the 2 decades ago, I think it was actually longer than that, it was in the 1980s, where the oil price dropped almost overnight from $32 a barrel to $8 a barrel. And this city was devastated. There were something like 50,000 redundancies in the northeast of Scotland at that time. We've had that experience, and it's scarring. So I don't think that, that the independence message adds very much to where we are, because I think that a country like Britain, with the resources and with the size of population, could take that hit. A country like Scotland, if anything like this was to happen again, would not be able to take the hit.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, apologies that we don't have more time for questions, but we have an overall conference programme to respect. What I'd like to do now is to give our two speakers a couple of minutes just to sum up their key points to emphasise to the audience. Frank, I'd like to give you the floor for 2 or 3 minutes, if you wouldn't mind doing it from the table.
Very quickly, I'm as Scottish as Fergus. I have the same emotional connection with Scotland. I was born, I was bred here, I was educated here. I've worked here all my life, with the odd visit to Westminster in between. But and it does not, none of this makes sense to me, particularly when we're living in a global economy where size is important, and I don't mean the smaller you are, the better you are, because I certainly don't believe that. The UK punches way above its weight in all areas of life, internationally, at every international convention. We're respected. Scots have, throughout the 300 years that we've been partners with England, part of the United Kingdom, have played an immense role in that. We in every respect, in science, in technology, in the arts, in politics, Scotland has always had a major influence in the way in which this country thinks and the way it operates. And I think that the small debate we've had today here on energy, important though the issues are, I think the issues around energy encompass the whole problem. There's lots of aspirations, lots of wish lists, but not a lot of fact.
Thank you, Frank. Fergus, please.
Thank you, Jim. I just wanted to correct a couple of points that Frank said in his opening remarks, which I think are important just in the interest of factual accuracy. He said that we would close down Hunterston and Torness. That is not correct, and has been made clear on innumerable occasions, and is also clear in our EGBS, which is on our website, which sets out how we believe electricity will be supplied in Scotland. In fact, it's quite the opposite. As long as I've said to Vincent de Riva, the chief executive of EDF, who's meeting with the First Minister, I think, today or tomorrow, as long as the existing nuclear power stations can operate safely and efficiently, they should continue to do so. It's right that they do so. A number of jobs depend on it, and they make an invaluable contribution at the moment to the grid, which is required. So that's simply factually wrong, I'm afraid. Secondly, there is no £20 billion decommissioning fund in the UK. 20 billion is the estimated cost of the total cost of decommissioning of 345 installations off the North Sea and west of Shetland. And that will take place over 40 years. But there is no money set aside. There is no pot of money, a fund, as has been said. Now, I wanted just briefly to say that the most important point to me is that an independent Scotland will work as an equal partner with the rest of the UK and honour all our commitments in respect of renewables. That is the most fundamental point. And from the work that I've been able to do with a great many people in this room, and especially a number of the companies involved in this field over the last 3 years, what I've seen is that there is a tremendous amount of cross-border trading between Scottish-based, English, Welsh, and Northern Irish companies. Of course that will continue. We want that to continue, and who wouldn't? It is great. It is a good form of trade, and the projects that they do, whether they may be located north or south of the border, aren't so much Scottish or English, but invaluable and essential to make a contribution to keep the lights on both sides of the border. So there is sometimes an assumption that those of us who are arguing for Scotland to be a normal independent country are arguing on the basis that we expect to be enemies with England. The opposite is the case, ladies and gentlemen. My assumption, my practice, my life and our future is that we'll be the closest of pals with the rest of the UK after independence. And I think that's a point that it's right for me to emphasise in closing my remarks.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this debate will continue and will certainly become all the more intense in the next 3 months. Again, just to conclude, thank you very much for your contributions, and let us give a final show of appreciation to the Minister, Fergus Ewing, and Frank Doran MP. Thank you.